Welcome to Tell Me Some More with me, your host, Dr. Sheva, clinical psychologist and curious human about all things emotions, relationships, connection, and growth. My mission is to help you in improving your self-confidence and your relationships, both with yourself as well as with others, and to increase your awareness around the topics that actually matter in order to live an intentional, fulfilling life. Each week, I'll be releasing one episode that will either be a solo session with me or a conversation with an expert in a different field. While I hope that you find this information helpful, it's not intended to be a substitute for mental health or medical treatment or professional advice. Now let's get curious and help you to have more of the life and the relationships that you desire and so deserve. Enjoy, everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Tell Me Some More with Dr. Sheva. I am your host, Dr. Sheva, and I'm so happy to be connecting with you. During today's episode, I want to focus on the difference between settling or being realistic or compromising within relationships. This is a question that I will oftentimes hear, especially when people are early on in their relationships and dating relationships specifically. So we'll be focusing on romantic relationships. And the question comes, how do I know if I'm settling with someone or if I'm compromising in a healthy way? And I think this is a really important question. I do want to just normalize if that's shown up for you. I know it has for me in the past, but really normalize that experience. And you want to be thinking about a few different things before you start really considering this question. So when I think about a healthy, successful, meaningful relationship, one that's committed, one that for many people maybe would lead to marriage, I think of that relationship as including a few different components that are foundational in my perspective. So the first one being emotional intimacy, and of course that's my number one. Granted, I'm a little biased, but also I just find that component of a romantic relationship so important and really foundational to other pieces as well. But what I mean by emotional intimacy is that sense of closeness, that sense of safety, that the connection to someone else's inner world, a genuine curiosity to understand their inner world, and the recognition that someone else's inner world is different than ours. And there's a desire to get to know that world that they have and how they interpret, how they experience things, what may be going on for them. And within a healthy relationships, ideally we feel that safety to share parts of our inner world or our inner world as a whole and be able to connect from that place where we have a different experience, different histories, different past, and we're able to bridge a connection with someone and connect with their inner experiences. So I feel like feeling that sense of safety, that great deep connection, that sense of home within ourselves, but also within that close romantic relationship. And I think that there are many different ways that we can focus on cultivating emotional intimacy, but that is one foundational component where that I consider for a successful romantic relationship. Then we have the physical attraction or sexual attraction. And I think this too is important to talk about. So this is the physical draw that we have towards someone, that attraction that can be simply physical, right? Where we are attracted to someone, we're intrigued by them, we want to be around them. It could also be that sexual compatibility, right? Or like that sexual attraction that we may have towards them. For me, when I consider a romantic relationship, I do think within many relationships, that is one defining characteristic that oftentimes we don't have within platonic relationships. So I see that as being one of the differentiators of, we can have a best friend where we feel a great sense of emotional intimacy with, but it is just that, right? Or a great sense of, emotional intimacy and fun, but it's really composed of those being the two main components. Whereas for a romantic relationship, I think in many types of romantic relationships, the sexual, physical attraction, the draw, the pull that we have and desire to be around that person, be close to them, is also very much present. And ideally, it is mutual. So this is something that in a healthy relationships, we want both people to be attracted to each other, to admire each other, to want to be close to each other physically. Whatever that may look like. And that can be in non-sexual ways, it can be in sexual ways. And then the other component that I really look at is shared values, right? So wanting a having at our core similar beliefs, similar values of what gives our lives, our relationships a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose. So, for instance, maybe, two people may be really family oriented and that is a value of theirs, or they may be very professionally driven, career driven, and that is their value. That is also maybe important to them within their relationships. But we know that when relationships have shared values, then it allows, both parties to be able to support one another in living a life that is going to be mutually meaningful and mutually beneficial to both parties, likely. Additionally, I think when we have shared values, then when conflicts occur, challenges occur, it's a lot easier to face those things, right? So if I'm having a conflict with a partner and both of our values is family and our relationships and friendships, then if it is related to one of those values, it's a lot easier for us to get on the same page, to understand where we're coming from, to understand why we're making the decisions that we're making. And so I think that it not only can make it the relationship a lot easier, but also it can make it more meaningful, right? When we're with someone who has similar values, it can inspire us to take those actions that are most important to us in ways that are most aligned for us, even at times when it may not feel comfortable, right? I think of it as like someone who, in those times where maybe we're not feeling as motivated or we're experiencing our own challenges, if we have someone who's on our side who can has similar values to ours, they can motivate us, they can encourage us, they can keep us accountable in those things. And then I think not final, but one of the other main components that I would consider is similar lifestyles, right? What do we like to do? What are the things that we enjoy engaging in? What are the things that we're not okay with engaging at times, it can include cultural expectations. It can include if we like to travel, not travel, what our day to day looks like, what our hobbies look like. Is this someone who, when I'm with, I feel like I'm living a life that is enjoyable to me? Do we participate in activities that we find to be enjoyable? Do we, have same perspectives on finances? Do we live a life that is pretty consistent for us, both financially or as far as what we want to do or not be doing? So those are some components of a successful relationship that I see when we are thinking about compatibility across these different components. And also, I would say I didn't share compatibility, but of course, hobbies and activities and all of that, interests all go into that. Intellectual perspective, stimulation, all of that goes into it. I am sorry, my microphone just fell. But anyway, so as I was saying, so these are for me some of the components of a healthy relationship that I look to. So when we're thinking about this idea of, are we settling or are we being realistic and compromising? I think it's important to first look at, what are our perspectives, or what is my perspective or my desire for what my romantic relationship should look like? And where has that been influenced by? Has it been influenced by outside sources, by family members? I think so often we have this image in our mind of what a romantic relationship needs to be like, and how we need to show up within that relationship, how our partner needs to show up in that relationship. And so I want to encourage you to really look at that and see what are parts that are truly you, that you believe in, that are important to you, and what are parts that maybe you can take away that aren't as important, or maybe have been influenced by other people or other cultural factors or the media. And when you have a really clear understanding of the type of relationship that you're wanting and who you want to be in that relationship and who you want your partner to be in that relationship, then I think we can start looking at, okay, well, am I settling within my relationships or am I just compromising? So when we're thinking about settling, for me, I consider a few different things. I think about, when we're settling, I think of oftentimes we are neglecting a part of what we wish our relationship would be like, what we had wanted to be like, or what we wish or had wanted at one point, as far as our need wanted for how our needs would be met and what type of needs we would want to be met. So I know I just said a lot right now. So when I think about settling, I'm going to repeat this. When I think about settling, I think about someone who's neglecting the needs that are met, the type of relationship that they would have, the feelings that they would feel within that relationship. So for instance, let's say it's really important for me to get certain emotional needs met. And I continue to stay in a relationship where those needs aren't being met, right? Where maybe the opposite of that is happening. So that could be an example of a time that I may be settling, right? If I choose to stay in that relationship despite the recognition that my needs aren't being met, be it emotional, be it physical, sexual, could be financial, whatever it may be. Also, I think the other piece that oftentimes we don't focus on is, are my feelings, is the way that I want to feel within a romantic relationship, is that showing up for me? So maybe I really would want to feel loved. Maybe I would want to feel desired, or I would want to feel those emotions towards my partner. Am I having those experiences? Am I drawn towards my partner? Right? Is there a desire? Do they help me to feel a sense of happiness, a sense of fulfillment? Do I have confidence within the relationship? These are all really important things, right? And if for each of us, it can look different, but I think it's being clear on what are the ways that you want to show up within a relationship, but what are the ways that you want to feel within your romantic relationships? And are those feelings being experienced? And if not, of course, it may be related to our own stuff, what may be happening within our world, but sometimes it can be related to the relationship itself. Another thing that we want to think about is, are we choosing to stay with someone out of habit, out of comfort, out of the life that has been built, out of our discomfort with conflict or change? These are all really important things, right? Oftentimes, many of us may choose to stay in situations that don't serve us, but that in the moment give us some type of benefit. So in that immediate moment, they're giving us comfort. They're giving us, familiarity. They're giving us not having to deal with uncomfortable emotions, right? And all of that then tends to keep us within a relationship, but ultimately a relationship that may not be most helpful for us in the long term. It's also considering when we're thinking about, are we settling, is there a part of us, I mentioned that we're like sacrificing our needs or certain feelings, but is there a part of us that we feel like we can't own, that we can't show, that we can't exercise, right? So maybe we are in a relationship with someone who everything is great, but that physical sexual aspect isn't existent, for instance. And if that's a part of you that is important to you, an important part of your identity, then we would want to look at that. What is the impact that that has if that need is not being met? Is this one that you are intentionally choosing to disregard? Or is this a need that is really important to you, that you feel like maybe that you are needing to, in the process, neglect your own experiences in order to maintain that relationship and stay in that relationship? So these are some examples of what settling can look like, and just some things that we want to consider. But also when we think about settling, I think that also it's important to see, what are the changes that are being made or that aren't being made on the other side. So what I mean by this is so often we may have a need and maybe we're aware of it and we share it with our partner. And hopefully we are in a safe, trusting relationship where we're able to do that. When that information is shared, or the changes that we're wanting to see, let's say, are non-negotiables, they're being shared, are those being things that are then changed, right? Or is the person continuing to not fulfill our needs? Are they not fulfilling our needs because of, for whatever reason, really, but are they still not fulfilling our needs? Right. So I'm huge on communication and communicating what we need in really safe, trusting relationships. But when we do that, does that person make the changes within our relationship that are important to us? Or do we start to feel differently about those things? As far as One last thing that I really think of when we're settling is oftentimes when we're settling, there's a strong desire to either change someone, change who they are, or change ourselves. And maybe it's changing ourselves in the ways that I mentioned, like disowning a part of our identity, what we need, or it could be trying to change that other person. So trying to change a core of who that person is. So it's not just, a suggestion or wanting more or less of a behavior, but when we're trying to change a core of someone and we're continuing to stay in that relationship, then oftentimes we want to look at, are we choosing to stay in a relationship that is not helpful for us? One in which is not maybe for us, right? When we're thinking about relationships that are realistic, what I mean when I think about this, what I think about is it's the understanding that as people, we are all imperfect. And those ideas that we have in our mind as to what a perfect relationship or marriage may look like are oftentimes influenced, again, by fairy tales. At least I can speak to my own experience. Fairy tales, maybe what we've seen, what people have shared with us. And so often what we see on media or what we see outside, let's say in parties, or what people selectively disclose are just one piece of the picture, right? It may be true, but there are oftentimes other things that are less than perfect that we may not always see. And so it's the recognition, again, that we are all imperfect. And even what may be perfect for us, as far as the fit, may not always be perfect in all ways, similar to the fact that we are not perfect in all ways. So when I think about being realistic, it's compromising in ways that are appropriate, that are achievable, that are feasible for each one of us, that make sense in the context of the relationship, in the context of what we're gaining from the relationship. So what I mean by this is, you know, um, when we start dating someone, I think it's natural to assume that we're going to need to compromise on some things. Why? Because this is a different person with different past experiences, different internal experiences, different maybe expectations or day to day experiences, different ways of just being in the world, responding, expressing their emotions, coping, dealing with everything that's happening for each one of us. And so, with those differences, at times, there will be a mismatch between my difference and someone else's difference, or my behavior and someone else's behavior. And so how can I compromise on mismatch, right? Are there things that I can do to be more supportive of my partner? Are there maybe new behaviors that I can engage in to let them know that I'm thinking of them? Because maybe I'm not letting them know I'm thinking of them in the ways that are most comfortable for me. Right. So maybe they're not picking that up. And so maybe I want to communicate that through their love language, for instance, letting them know I'm thinking about them in their specific ways that I know that person can then be able to take it. So that is something that we can compromise in, right? Negotiate on if needed, right? Also the recognition that, like, in the process of dating someone, we will grow and change and evolve individually, but also together. And so as the relationship grows and changes, we too will grow and change. I really strongly do believe that each person can bring out a different side of us. We are authentically ourselves. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that you're going to be completely different with each person that you're dating, but in the process of dating someone in that unique dynamic, there may be a part of you that may be more highlighted or shown because of that person's traits or attributes. And that energy that we make from one another, that dynamic that is established, that influences the type of relationship that we have, how we are within that relationship. And so I share all that to say all of that are changes. These are changes that are happening. Oftentimes, that can be really beautiful changes, but it may not be in the ways that we ideally had imagined. So for me, what is realistic is the recognition that we are imperfect, that we are going to interact with individuals where we're going to need to change in some ways, where they're going to need to change in some ways in order to make the relationship fit. And so there's compromise that feels There's compromise that is intentional, that is mutual, where both parties are invested within the relationship and they're compromising or making changes in service of one another, in service of the relationship as a whole. So I feel like when I think about someone who's being realistic or compromising, their needs are still being met. They're still within a fulfilling, meaningful relationship. It just may not look like exactly as how they would have imagined. So again, it's realistic, right? Whereas with settling, our needs are oftentimes not being met. Many of our needs are not being met. And likely there are some beliefs about the ability for those needs to be met. Oftentimes when people are settling, there's this belief that they're not going to ever get their needs met, or it's unrealistic to find someone who can fulfill their needs, or that it's too much effort to leave the relationship, or there may not be anyone better. And so that fear or those limited beliefs lead us to make a choice that ultimately leads us to stay in that relationship. So this is just some food for thought. I hope that it's helpful. I know that there's many other components that we can talk about when we think about a healthy relationship, when we think about what differentiates settling versus being realistic, but these are just some things to consider. Ultimately, I hope that this inspires some self-reflection and helps you to take those actions or interact and engage with the world, with other people, with yourself in ways that are most meaningful and supportive of you and your values. Thanks so much for joining today's episode, and let me know what you thought in the comments. Bye, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to Tell Me Some More with Dr. Sheva. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're enjoying the podcast, it would mean a lot to me if you would subscribe, share, and write me a 5-star review on iTunes so that we can build this wonderful community and support others in living fulfilling lives. Just a reminder that this podcast and the information shared is solely for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. It's not meant to be a substitute for mental health or medical treatment or advice. If you're looking for additional support in your journey, please seek out a qualified professional. Until next time, everyone, talk soon.